Why do we see so many people in the tarantula hobby impulse buy tarantulas? An even better question to that is, why is it so generally accepted to impulse buy tarantulas? I see people all the time post in groups saying that they went to a pet store and they just went to get feeders, and then guess what? I came home with this tarantula. And the response to those kind of posts in tarantula groups are usually like, yeah, I do that all the time. Almost any other animal, if you go to an expo or a pet store or order some kind of mystery box, the response would be negative. But when it comes to tarantulas, it's a common thing and it's an accepted thing. So my video today, I guess, is pretty much going to tell you why it's okay to impulse buy a tarantula. Look how good Sephora's being today. I think she's going to molt soon. I really hope so, because she's the one I've had for literally like 5 years now. I think she was actually an impulse buy even, but she was my first Aphonopelma chalcodes and she's never molted. Like, she's probably super old, but I don't know. We'll see. Oh, I got her little enclosure here, which will come in handy later. But we are just going to put her back. Oh, you don't want to go back? I know. How about we go this way? You go that way? Okay. She's like, I'm an old lady, I'm very slow. I can do this whole video without the lid and she won't even move an inch. So because tarantulas are an exceptionally low maintenance animal with very few needs, a very low cost of maintenance, generally, like, it's not a big deal to have a whole bunch of them. And that's why I think, at least partly why, so many people in the tarantula hobby tend to have 10, 20, 30, hundreds of tarantulas, and they still have a life outside of that. Once you get your first tarantula and you start getting more established in the tarantula hobby, you can pretty much keep any species by asking yourself these 3 questions. So the first question you're going to ask yourself is if the tarantula is arboreal, terrestrial, or fossorial. That's going to determine the type of enclosure that you're going to be setting up. So if they're an arboreal species, all you need to do is get in an enclosure that's going to be taller than it is lengthwise. And if you're doing terrestrial, you're going to want a good amount of surface area, but you're also going to want a nice amount of substrate. And if they're fossorial, then obviously you are going to be putting them in something that's going to accommodate a lot of substrate and digging room for them. So once you've established what kind of enclosure that species is going to need, if they're arboreal, terrestrial, or fossorial, another important thing to find out is if they're old world or new world. Old world tarantulas are going to be a little bit more intermediate, just because they do tend to have a little bit more of a medically significant venom, and also they're sometimes a little bit more temperamental as well. Not always, but a lot of the times they are. The biggest reason why I think you should know if it's old world or new world is just basically their speed. They tend to be insanely quick in comparison to new worlds. And the way it's determined if they're old world or new world is where they're from. So this is an African species, so they are old world, and this is actually from the United States and also Mexico, so this is the new world. And the third important thing that you are going to want to ask yourself is if they come from a tropical climate or if they come from a desert climate, because that's going to determine what their humidity should be around, basically. Don't get too hung up on humidity. I know it's a scary word in this hobby, but loosely, let's just say, for the sake of this video, it's going to pretty much determine what the humidity should be for that species. So in this enclosure, I have my E. murinus, and as you can see, I do have her a little bit more damp. There is like drops of water on her web, and I do tend to keep her a little bit more humid. What we know is that some of them stay in a little bit more of a dry climate, and some of them stay in a little bit more of a humid climate. So I kind of keep it really nice there in like the medium range. I try to keep one side a little bit more damp than the other, like this substrate. She's in this tunnel over here, and so she doesn't really come out much, but I do keep it damp over here. So if she does want that like humidity or wants to take a drink of water, usually this is the side of the enclosure she will gravitate to pretty quickly. Now over here in this enclosure, I have my M. balfouri, and while this probably isn't the driest species, it does live in a little bit more of a dry climate. So I do keep a full cup of water just because I generally like to for most, if not all, my tarantulas. But yeah, I have this piece of wood here, and the reason why I have this wood in this enclosure is because it's not really going to be very damp in here, so I don't have to worry about this kind of wood molding. But then over here in her enclosure, I put cork bark because cork bark is great in more humid habitats. So you can do that without worrying about it molding. If you want to put live plants in it, I probably wouldn't put live plants in with my M. balfouri, but I could totally put live plants in with my E. murinus, and both of them would do just fine because they both are going to want to, be watered more regularly than this. Also, something that I'm wanting to mention, just because it kind of plays into it, is if it's a more humid species, you're typically going to want to do a little bit less ventilation. Now, you're still going to want ventilation, obviously, if it's a species that maybe doesn't rely on the humidity as much. What I like about tarantula cribs is you actually have this selection. If you want to do like a more humid lid, something that's going to keep that humidity in there better, you can select this. Or if you want to go ahead and get a lid with more ventilation, that's going to, still keep it humid in here, but also dry out a little bit faster. We have my Aphonopelmahense right here. She's like, what is this noise? And this is a species here from Missouri that I've actually observed in the wild, and we do go through a lot of flooding and a lot of rain in the spring, but then in the summer it gets really hot. I mean, it's like 90 degrees today, and it's not even summer quite yet, but it gets really hot and dry sometimes too. So this is a species that goes through really high amounts of rainfall, and then also just like longer periods of no rain and really intense heat. So yeah, when I water her, I really water her heavily, but I have this ventilation, which is going to allow the enclosure to dry out just a little bit quicker than something like this. So, I mean, it really kind of depends what you're going for. And I do understand that this is probably a little complicated. It doesn't have to be this complicated, honestly, but like, I'm just kind of covering it for the purpose of this video, that these are things that you could consider. So those are the 3 pretty easy questions that you need to answer when impulse buying a tarantula. Now, as for all these tarantulas that we talked about today, arboreal, terrestrial, fossorial, new world, old world, tropical, or desert tarantulas, they are all going to have the same diet of bugs, different kinds of insects and worms. Some will probably be eating a little bit more often than others, but it's not too far off. And they're all going to need the same 4 things: an enclosure, some dirt, a hide or some kind of cork or some kind of like decor for them to web up, water dish. Super easy, pretty universal for all of them. And finally, they're all going to pretty much thrive at the same temperature that you're comfortable at. But something that I like to work around here is like, say I keep my room like a pretty solid 75 to 78 degrees. So the tarantulas that I think are gonna like to be warmer, I tend to put on the top shelf, versus the ones that I think are going to like to be cooler, I'll put them on the bottom shelf. So I hope this video helped. I thought it might be useful to some of you, and yeah, I guess let's all go impulse buy some tarantulas today, right? If you're still watching, go ahead and comment down below if you've ever impulse bought a tarantula and what species it was and maybe how that went for you. I don't know. But yeah, other than that, like this video if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're not, and you want to be. Don't forget I have an Instagram, but it's probably way too much, is at Tarantula.kat. You can go follow me there. I also have a Patreon, podcast, and a Teespring. It is all linked down below, and I will see you guys soon. Let's get into the Patreon pet pics.